What's up, Nashville? This is Beau with the Free Speech Podcast presented by Beechwood Commercial Real Estate Brokerage. As always, we are going to bring you the top stories of the week in Nashville commercial real estate, politics, culture, and sports. I'm going to quickly go over the stories we're covering in today's show, and then we'll get started. Number one, a new state law aims to shorten permitting in Tennessee. What a great idea. I'm going to catch you up on that story. Adam Newman, that's the guy that created WeWork, a flexible workspace provider, also called co-working. I've got a history in the co-working business, so I've always been very intrigued by Adam Newman and WeWork. His new company called Flow launches condo sales at a newly converted apartment tower in Miami. I think that is an interesting story, and I'm going to walk you through exactly what Flow aims to do, or how Flow aims to interrupt both apartments and now condos. Next, we'll talk about the port strike and how companies are bracing for that. I'll give you some of my hot takes on how I perceive unions in this country. Next, we'll talk about the East Bank Scrapyard site that is now heading to auction. This is one of the most prime pieces of real estate in Nashville. Leaders in Nashville have been trying to free this scrapyard up for new development for, I want to say 40, 50 years. It's finally about to happen through an auction process. I'll tell you that story. Did you know that many folks have negative equity in their cars? 31% of car owners are now underwater on the value of their cars. I'm going to tell you that story. Salt Life, a retail brand that's most famous in the Southeast, specifically Florida, an interesting brand. Its new owner is to close dozens of stores across 10 states. I'm going to tell you that story. Next, we'll talk about a new Marriott hotel slated for the East Bank. And lastly, pharmacy chain giant CVS plans to lay off nearly 3,000 corporate employees. I'll tell you that story, and I'll catch you up on what's going on in the pharmacy business in this country. Once thought to be kind of untouchable blue chip companies that are really, really struggling. And in my opinion, given how they behaved during the so-called pandemic, I think they deserve everything that's coming to them. And I'll tell you that story. Let's get into it. A new state law aims to shorten permitting in Tennessee. Governor Bill Lee in April signed a law allowing developers to hire third-party inspectors in lieu of government inspectors to check for certain violations on construction sites. And I can tell you right now, this is a challenging thing to deal with. You know, I'm in the process of bringing a building out of the ground right now. I'm not really a ground-up developer. I'm doing it. It's my own project. And it is a very, very hard thing to do. Just the starting and the stopping and the starting and the stopping. And every time you stop, it's very, very difficult to get these contractors back out to your job site. They're bouncing from job site to job site because of all of these holdups, like waiting on government inspections. So what they're trying to do in Tennessee is provide a second option where you can hire a third-party private business to do your inspections in an effort to make them much, much faster and make the development process much more efficient. The challenge is many contractors don't know this law exists. One of the big players in the private side of the inspection business is known as Chicago-based Municipal Inspection Partners. The firm began offering permit expediting services in Nashville 2 years ago. The permit approval process can take up to 6 months when led by the Metro Codes Department, and the company is pushing permits through in 6 to 8 weeks. So you can go from 6 months to 6 to 8 weeks by avoiding using government workers. Contractors throughout Tennessee have really been on the governor's back in some areas. It takes forever for a building inspector to come out and do inspections. This is coming from municipal inspection partners again, quote, "I already have contractors calling me. My phone's ringing off the wall saying, we want to hire you to handle all of our inspections. But on the city side of it, the city building inspectors don't know how the law is going to work. There have been no administrative rules, administrative hearings, nothing. Nobody knows how it's supposed to work. How builders will find independent inspectors will depend on the jurisdiction. The law requires third-party inspectors to provide the reports to the local government not later than 10 business days after the inspection. However, no one is aware how these reports should be submitted. So we're trying to outsource some of the roles of government officials, and in doing so, the government officials still haven't given them any feedback on how they're actually supposed to submit these reports, rather. So we've gotten government out of the way to a certain extent, but the government remains in the way. We've still got some work to do. As new construction continues to pick up across Nashville, the newly effective law seeks to reduce lengthy wait times for inspections. And I think this is a brilliant idea. You know, I've always thought the government did not need to be involved in building inspections. That is something a third-party private company could do so just as well, but do so at a lower cost and certainly much quicker. So these are the type of laws that I'd love to see put in place. Give people options. Do not force them to use the government for anything construction related. Give them a plan B. That plan B over time is going to become much easier to use, much more effective at keeping projects on track. So while this new state law just went into effect, there's going to be a learning curve. But if you check back in a year from now, I think this is really going to be a positive for the construction business in Tennessee. So Governor Bill Lee is not a perfect man, but he's done a pretty good job, right? So a lot of folks give him trouble in Tennessee, claiming he's not conservative enough. He gets a lot of hate in Tennessee for not being like a Ron DeSantis-like character. Everybody loves Ron DeSantis out of Florida. Many folks in Tennessee would love for Bill Lee to behave in a more aggressive way, really pushing through the conservative agenda like Ron has done in Florida. But I'm not a hater on Bill Lee. I think for the most part, he's done a good job and continues to do so. No one's perfect. Bill Lee is doing a good job, and this is a good example of a government policy that really makes a lot of sense. Let's get the government out of the way. Let's let the private businesses take care of business, and all of a sudden what you're going to see happen is projects are getting done faster and therefore getting done at a lower expense, which is going to flow through to the consumer eventually. Next story, Adam Newman's Flow launches condo sales at the newly converted apartment tower in Miami. Flow, former WeWork CEO Adam Newman's latest venture centered on residential and so-called community-oriented living. So the whole concept of Flow is this idea of community-oriented living. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's an apartment that you're renting. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a condo that you own. The key disruption factor here, the unique factor of Flow, is this idea of community-oriented living. I'm not selling you this as a legitimate business. WeWork was never a legitimate business. It lost money its entire existence. It continues to lose money. So I'm not suggesting this is an awesome idea, but it is interesting. Now, Flow and its so-called community-oriented living is launching sales for the company's first condominium project in downtown Miami. The 40-story tower offers 466 units, which is a big tower, folks, including studios and one bedroom. So 466 studios and one bedrooms. Prices for studios begin at $450,000, while one-bedroom units start at $600,000. The project's expected to be completed in 2025. Construction of Flow House began in early 2022 on what was originally planned as a 422-unit apartment complex. The tower is connected by an amenity deck to what's called Flow Miami next door, one of Newman's first apartment buildings to operate under his new company. The co-founder of flexible office provider WeWork launched Flow in 2022. Flow's goal is to revolutionize the apartment industry in the same manner Newman changed the flexible office industry with WeWork. Mind you, he did change the flexible office industry with WeWork, and he lost an insane amount of money doing it. He personally benefited. He got paid, but the business itself was a money-losing venture. I personally owned 2 different co-working centers earlier in my life. Our main competitor was WeWork, so I always studied, their rates and what their offerings were, and it was just a business model that made absolutely no sense. They held their rents artificially low just to get somebody in the office, doing so locking in losses month after month after month. So they were actually very difficult to compete with because they didn't have to turn a profit, where I did have to turn a profit. I ended up selling both those co-working centers a few years later after I determined, there was really limited upside in the co-working business. But there are some co-working providers around Nashville that seem to be doing very well. They continue to expand, especially outside of the downtown core. So they seem to have figured it out. I didn't think there was enough upside in that business, so I exited it. Quote, "We learned while building Flow over the last 2 years that the exact same needs faced by renters are also faced by owners in terms of lack of community and lack of connectivity. Flow House will feature a strong focus on wellness and sustainability." You lose me. I think sustainability is the least attractive sales pitch I've ever heard. Some people get excited about this idea of sustainable living. I don't. I'm focused on my experience, right? Is my experience better in your community-oriented living? Don't talk to me about sustainability. That's just me. Amenities at Flow House include 24/7 concierge services, a yoga and Pilates studio with meditation space, a spa equipped with a sauna, steam rooms, and a cold plunge, and an on-site restaurant, bar, and coffee lounge, along with a dog park. So a lot of this stuff is good, right? Saunas are great, steam rooms are great, cold plunges are great, as long as you're cool with sharing those with random people. Obviously, having a restaurant, bar, and coffee on site, that's awesome. So some of these things are good. I'm not sure how revolutionary this concept is, but let's continue. Maybe I'm wrong. Flow House also plans to feature Workflow, a new service from Flow that offers flexible offices and co-working spaces to companies and individuals. So they're building in this WeWork Lite concept into the same properties that are offering apartments and condos. This is interesting to me. So this idea of apartment buildings before they're built being changed over to condo uses, that's very uncommon, right? For a number of years, buildings that were expected to be condos, they would change to apartments because the market conditions were such that made more sense. Now we've kind of come full circle, and a lot of these apartment deals are actually being converted to condos before they're actually built. Developers have been converting apartment projects into condominiums in South Florida as a result of the past few years of elevated interest rates. Some developers are adjusting their plans because either their loan is maturing, they won't be able to resell it, or they won't have the exit they originally planned for. Apartment projects are being changed to condos because the economics are better and the demand is still there in South Florida. It's less risky for developers. Miami-based Flow has 4 residential properties operating in the U.S. and 3 in Saudi Arabia. So my man who created WeWork and was the only one to ever make any money off of it, all of his investors, everyone else lost money, but my man made some money. He ran off with that money. He's now envisioned this community-oriented living called Flow, and he's going to work some WeWork Lite type office space into each project. So I'm not sure I fully understand why it's disruptive or why it's revolutionary, and I certainly would not give this guy any of my money to invest. But nevertheless, this is a big project, 466 units. I wish him well. Let's see how it plays out. Maybe it's revolutionary. Maybe it's just another condo building. We shall see. Let's keep moving. Companies brace for port strike. Companies such as retailers, cargo shippers, trucking, and rail firms were bracing for the impact as dock workers at 14 key East and Gulf Coast ports go on strike. This started Tuesday, October 1st, as the current labor contract expired. We're talking about 50,000 workers, y'all. JP Morgan estimated a strike could cost the U.S. economy $3.8 billion to $4.5 billion per day. The affected ports are key hubs for imports such as cars, furniture, appliances, fruits, and vegetables. Some retailers that depend on cargo ports have already switched some shipments to West Coast ports in advance of the potential strike. So as I understand it, to the extent possible, shippers have moved out of these East and Gulf ports and are now working out of West Coast ports. There's also the possibility of flying in goods, so you're skipping the ports. I will tell you, this seems like a very heavy-handed approach, right? So I've never been a big fan of unions. I'm open-minded to being wrong about this, but my take on unions is unions benefit the members of the union at the expense of everyone else, right? So you're having added costs for everything else because these union workers are receiving compensation packages and other terms that otherwise wouldn't be available in the free market. I think everyone should compete based on merit. I think everyone should compete without these artificial rules being put in place by unions. That's my take on it. My understanding on this is they are really approaching this strike aggressively. They're requesting a 77% total increase in compensation between salary and benefits, with the average worker already earning six figures working at these ports. And the one that's the term of the negotiation that I think is even more offensive is this idea that they will not permit any automation at these ports. So if you haven't seen this yet, take a look at some of the more sophisticated ports in China, and the entire port is automated, right? So there are not men driving trucks moving things. There are computers that are driving autonomous vehicles moving everything around. So there's very few people working there, and the people that are working there are working behind computer screens, making sure that the robots and the technology and the AI is all working properly. But that's really what these folks fear. So they're going for a 77% increase and a agreement to offer no automation at the port. So to keep the ports as inefficient and as expensive as possible is what these union members want. I have no idea how this is going to play out, but it does seem very heavy-handed. The timing certainly isn't good with all the damage that's recently occurred in East Tennessee, North Carolina, some areas of Florida. We've got multiple wars going on. Supposedly, we don't even have money to support folks in North Carolina. And now we're going to have added pressure in the economy because we've got a 50,000 union member strike going on, looking for a 77% increase and to ensure that our ports remain as inefficient as possible. So maybe my take on that is wrong. I'm open-minded. I understand that unions many years ago really did some good things for their members related to safety. Now it seems to me that this is just a money grab, and it is a very heavy-handed form of extortion. And, I hope it doesn't have any impact on us folks here in Tennessee. But as soon as fruits and vegetables are no longer available at the local grocery store, you're going to see the impact of these ongoing union strikes. 50,000 folks sitting at home waiting to extort the government for a 77% pay increase. Let's keep moving. Carl Icahn's East Bank Scrapyard site heads to auction. People have been dreaming about this in Nashville for 30 years, perhaps 40 years. Let's get into how significant this is. Icahn Enterprises, chaired by famed activist, investor, and billionaire Carl Icahn, is set to sell the entire 45-acre site through an auction process. An auction date has not been revealed, but it is set for mid-November. The auction will include a reserve, meaning that if building does not reach that undisclosed minimum price, the property may not sell. Icahn's 45 acres on the East Bank represent one of several major puzzle pieces in Metro's expansive vision for a revitalized area across the Cumberland River from downtown. The riverfront scrap operation, part of which is bordered by the city's interstate loop, sits at the southern end of a roughly 550-acre area whose northern end is the River North area, where Oracle is planning a tech office campus on 70 acres the company acquired more than 3 years ago. Several significant mixed-use developments sit in between, along with the site of the city's new NFL stadium. Mayors and governors have tried for the last quarter century to figure out a way to relocate the scrapyard and free that land for redevelopment. Icahn had a framework deal in place with Mayor John Cooper in the fall of 2019, but the two sides hit a stalemate. Icahn sold PSC Metals in 2021 to SA Recycling, but retained ownership of the East Bank land and now leases it to SA Recycling. In August, SA Recycling rerouted some of its activity to a newly acquired property in West Nashville. So, Icahn, who owned PSC Metals and the property, sold PSC Metals, kept the property, leased it to the buyer of PSC Metals, short term, until they could find a new location, which they did in West Nashville. So now PCS Metals no longer needs the scrapyard downtown, which is why it is really becoming a much more active situation with this property really set to close, I would say, in the next 6 months. Momentum has continued to pick up on the East Bank as the Titans Nissan Stadium project aims for a 2027 completion. In Boston's The Fallon Company, which cemented a deal this year to develop 30 acres of Metro-owned land on the East Bank, eyes an early 2026 start date. So, the moral to this story is the stadium area or the East Bank area is going to be one of the most fantastic areas in all of Nashville by 2030, I would say. And the East Bank Scrapyard site is going to be a huge part of that. It's going to sell to one of the larger developers in the country, perhaps in the world. It's going to take deep pockets to get a deal like that done. But I do think this is a very good thing for Nashville. That scrapyard site has always been out of place, has always been an eyesore. And if this deal trades in the next 6 months, as I expect it will, this is a very good thing for Nashville, and we should all be collectively happy for it. Something very, very cool will replace it. And it is a low bar to have something cooler than a scrapyard right next to your NFL stadium, right? Very, very uncommon. Get rid of the scrapyard and let's go. It's finally happening. Let's keep moving. Number 5, this is a short one. Negative equity in cars and trucks, right? I'm interested in the car market. We saw car prices, both new and used cars, really get out of whack during the so-called pandemic. And then we also had the introduction of electric vehicles where most manufacturers kind of went all in even before demand was really there. So you've had all these interesting dynamics in the car business. I think it's starting to play itself out. For those folks that just couldn't wait for prices to normalize again, And I get it. If your car breaks and you need a new car, you got to choose amongst your available options. But for someone like me, I bought my car in 2018. I think it's got close to 100,000 on it now. I never thought once to get a new car during the so-called pandemic because the numbers were just so off and skewed, and I knew they were unrealistic and they'd ultimately come back to earth. A lot of people didn't connect those dots. According to a Q3 survey, quarter three survey, 31% of owners now owe more on their loan than their car is worth. And with 61% of consumers overestimating the value of their car, some of them probably don't even realize it. But there's one group struggling particularly bad with this issue: electric vehicle owners. 46% were underwater this quarter alone. Plus, electric vehicles are depreciating much faster compared to other brands. The bottom line is some tough conversations are waiting around the corner for many dealers and car buyers. So if you bought during the so-called pandemic at very, very elevated prices and you're already looking to trade that vehicle in, just know the trade-in value on that vehicle may be less than what you owe on the loan that you took out to buy it. Next, Salt Life. So Salt Life is I would say a nautical brand, an ocean brand. You'll see lots of skulls and crossbones. Salt meaning ocean. The ocean is full of salt. Salt Life's new owner to close dozens of stores across 10 states. Iconics International plans to transition the brand into a wholesale and e-commerce model, right? So now they've got stores all across 10 different states. The new owner is saying, hey, we're closing the stores. We're going to sell through wholesale and e-commerce only. The new owner of Salt Life, an activewear brand for outdoor and ocean enthusiasts, is closing all of its retailer stores as it transitions the brand to a wholesale and e-commerce model. Iconics, a brand management company, acquired Salt Life in a competitive bankruptcy auction for about $39 million. It's now conducting liquidation sales at 28 stores across 10 states, as well as at an undisclosed number of distribution centers. The stores are set to close over the next few months as part of an organized wind down. Half of Salt Life stores are located in Florida, where the brand was founded in 2003. I do a lot of business in Florida. I've owned property in Florida. I once thought about living in Florida, so maybe that's why this brand resonates with me. I've never been a Salt Life guy. I'm a father of four, a businessman. I don't need like pirates and skulls and bones and stuff. But nevertheless, I get it. It's an ocean brand. I like ocean brands. Iconics owns a variety of retail clothing brands such as Ed Hardy, Zoo York, London Fog, and about 24 others. Iconics plans to expand the Salt Life brand globally through its network of licensing partners. So you've got a clothing brand that is exiting every retail store that it owns or leases and purely going wholesale, which means sold by others, or e-commerce where you can buy from them through their website. If I'm a clothing brand and if I can pull this off, this is a much more realistic way to sell products like this than it is opening your own stores. I think that's a difficult task. I think, that probably is the reason it entered bankruptcy in the first place. You'll see Salt Life stickers all over Florida, for example, across the Southeast. So it is a popular brand, but to support retail stores is a whole nother story. I think this will keep the Salt Life brand strong and around for years to come. I think this makes sense. As much as I hate to see retail stores closing, we've got a lot of retail going out of business right now. We're going to talk about CVS in a minute. That's one of the big users of retail space that's exiting a lot of their properties. We've got a lot of retailers going out of business, but we've also got a lot of retailers that are looking for that really high-class, Class A space ready to backfill them. So I don't think it'll have a huge negative effect on the marketplace. but I do think it's an interesting story. Let's go back to the East Bank, right? So we talked about the Scrapyard. Very important part of the East Bank, but not the only part. Dream Capital Management is eyeing an 8-story Marriott hotel on 5th Street near the East Bank. The hotel, which will rise at 751 South 5th Street, will offer 265 rooms and 2 Marriott hotel brands. The third level will include an outdoor amenity area with a pool, fire pit, and outdoor dining and seating areas. The ground level of the building will offer around 7,000 square feet of retail space. Dream Capital does not yet own the site. The 1.4-acre property, located a short drive from the new Tennessee Titans Stadium project, Dream Capital's first project in the Nashville area. So this is the first project they've done locally. The investment firm is behind several Marriott and Hilton hotel projects in Georgia, Alabama, Chattanooga, and Knoxville. And you know, I'm not a real big hotel guy. I got 4 kids, right? So hotels don't line up for me great. But when I do have to stay in a hotel, I am a Marriott guy. So I am thankful that we've got another Marriott being added. You know, I think it'll do really well there in the East Bank. You know, smart money is investing in the East Bank right now. It isn't necessarily going to pay off immediately, but if you look 5, 7, 10 years out, the money being invested in the East Bank is going to really pay off. So a new Marriott hotel coming to the East Bank amongst 100 different other things coming from the East Bank. You're going to hear a lot about the East Bank in the years to come. In our last story of the day, y'all, pharmacy chain giant CVS plans to lay off nearly 3,000 employees, corporate employees. Drugstore chain CVS, already shutting stores due to reduce costs, now plans to lay off about 2,900 employees in a belt-tightening measure aimed at helping it slash $2 billion. CVS said the layoffs will reduce its workforce by less than 1%. Our industry faces continued disruption, regulatory pressures, and evolving consumer needs and expectations, so it is critical that we remain competitive and operate at peak performance. I will tell you, I absolutely hate going to pharmacies, to drugstores, to pharmacies, whatever you want to call them. The service is terrible. My perspective is these are places that are full of sickness. I'm always standing in line. You know, everyone is unfriendly. Nothing is ever ready when it's supposed to be ready. This is the pharmacy business is a perfect example of how life was better before the so-called pandemic, right? Shutting down the world in fear of a new cold virus continues to cause problems. You know, as our government leaders began to shut down private business, tell us that we could not leave our house, that our children could not go to school, the first thing I said was, wait till they find out about all the unintended consequences of this ridiculous decision making. How dare the government force private business to close their doors? And it ruined industries. It ruined the pharmacy business. It ruined the airline business. It really decimated areas that once were tourism driven. You know, this is one of those many unintended consequences. A lot of people have a bad taste in their mouth for these pharmacies. And if they can avoid ever stepping inside a pharmacy again, that's absolutely what they're going to do. The layoffs, primarily impacting corporate jobs, will help CVS to achieve this goal and position ourselves for sustainable growth. The reductions will not impact frontline jobs in our stores, pharmacies, and distribution centers. All the major pharmacy store operators, not only CVS, but Rite Aid and Walgreens, have been trying to weather financial challenges, and all 3 have been closing stores, and all 3 deserve to close stores. Drugstore chains have been plagued by shifting consumer habits, meaning consumers don't want to go there. Consumers don't want to give you your money because you don't do a good job. It's a horrible experience. Lower reimbursement rates, maybe, and heightened competition from rivals such as Amazon and Walmart. Ding, 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 ding. If you can get your prescriptions filled by Amazon and mailed directly to your house at a lower cost, you would be a fool not to do it. Why would anyone want to step in any of these pharmacies? The pharmacists are not helpful. The folks that are working there are not friendly. It's not an efficient process. It's painful and it's full of germs and airborne viruses. I hate the pharmacy, and it makes perfect sense to me that other folks probably hate these pharmacies as well, which is being reflected in their not going there, which is causing all three of them to cut costs and close stores in an effort to quit hemorrhaging money. So, along with the airline industry, who I also try not to give any money because of the terrible customer service and how poorly they treat their customers. I used to enjoy flying before the pandemic. I used to fly every other week, as a matter of fact. And now, I recently had an opportunity to fly to Cleveland, which is 8 hours away from where I live. And I actually chose to drive 8 hours rather than deal with the nightmare that is using the airlines in this country right now. So, good riddance to the airlines, good riddance to the pharmacies. You reap what you sow, and it's your turn to deal with it. More fallout from the so-called pandemic. So, that's what I've got for you all today, guys. I'm going to leave politics off this week. We did have the recent vice presidential debate. J.D. Vance, very impressive guy. I liked what he had to say. Obviously, I'm a conservative, and I'm not really choosing candidates based on if I like them or if their personality lines up with mine or if they're nice or not nice. I am one of these very practical people that chooses the policies that I think will be best for our country, will be best for me personally. So, in my opinion, there has never been a weaker ticket than Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. The Minnesota and California connection, those are two states that I refuse to step foot in. So why we would want to bring those ideas nationwide and ruin the other 48 states, I have absolutely no idea. So I do not think very much about the current state of the Democrat Party. I'm very, very bullish on the policies being pushed by the conservatives in this election. If we can't win this election with these two candidates and with their failed policy agenda, this country is in a lot of trouble. And I'm not sure how we're going to get out of it rather than negotiate a national breakup, which would not be the worst thing ever. And I've talked about that on previous episodes. So maybe we'll build on that next week. But until then, I've got other things I got to do. So I've got to bounce. Thanks so much for tuning in. As always, this episode was brought to you by Beechwood Commercial Real Estate Brokerage. We are commercial real estate brokers that specialize in listing and selling commercial properties throughout the Southeast. If you are an owner of a commercial property and you'd like us to walk you through exactly what it will look like to list and sell your property in today's marketplace, please reach out to us and we'll be more than happy to help. Until next week.